I played quite a few racing games on the Mega Drive, and I enjoyed a lot of them, but only a few really captured the feeling of manoeuvring a heavy chunk of metal at dangerous speeds, and most of them were top-down affairs like Rock and Roll Racing and Micro Machines, the latter of which, it occurs to me now, didn't involve heavy chunks of metal at all. The more conventional racing games, the ones that give you a first-person or behind-the-shoulder view of the action and use scaling sprites to give the impression of speed, usually felt more like you were stationary, and the world was moving towards you. But there was one series that, in my opinion at least, managed to buck this trend and really make you feel like you were being propelled through the pixelated landscape at rocket-like velocities. That series was Road Rash. For the uninitiated, Road Rash involves motorbikes, point-to-point racing, and bashing the crap out of your rivals. Yes, this is not just a racing game, it's one that's been put in a blender with a beat-em-up. These days I tend to prefer pure racing games over those with vehicular combat, but I'm more than happy to make an exception for Road Rash, because not only are the combat elements pretty fun, the racing action is amongst the best of its era. So let's start with the very first Road Rash, released in 1991 for the Mega Drive. I never actually played this first game in the series back in the day. I started with Road Rash 2, so this is all new to me. Except it's not really that new, the differences between the three Mega Drive Road Rashes are not massive. First thing that'll hit you is the theme tune. It rocks, in the way that only the Mega Drive sound chip can. There are some real high quality rock tunes in all three of the Mega Drive games, and to be totally honest, they're not necessarily 100% my sort of music, but they are well made and they fit the games perfectly. You're presented with 5 locations to race through, all of them in that fabled paradise known as California. I've never been to California myself, but as I understand, it's only a quick swim over the Pacific, so maybe I'll give it a go one day. In the meantime, I have this incredibly realistic virtual landscape to tide me over. Okay, that's mild sarcasm, but actually the graphics are really pretty good by the standards of the day. Everything's very pixelated, but there's a good amount of variety to the sprites and they scale quite effectively. The different environments run the gamut from desert to densely wooded forests. Well, maybe not that dense, there are limits to what the Mega Drive could achieve. The frame rate, for instance, it's not exactly smooth. Even compared to other similar games of the era, it's pretty rough. These days, the idea of playing a racing game at less than 60 frames per second may seem like something barbaric, and going back to something like Road Rash does take a bit of getting used to, but once you do get used to it, it's not much of an issue. In fact, in a strange way, the particular style of gameplay in Road Rash is quite accommodating of a low frame rate. There's a certain heaviness to the handling of the bikes that means you don't really feel like you're losing too much control during the massive gaps between each frame. The handling is actually a strange combination of heavy and twitchy that's tough to describe. You start turning quickly, but straightening up again can take some time. All I know is it really works well, it's insanely fun when you get the hang of it. The tracks are, well, I can't really say that they're well designed as such, they're kind of generic, not much more than randomly assembled sequences of twists and turns and ups and downs. But again, this isn't really an issue because although when taken as a whole the tracks aren't particularly memorable, the individual ingredients that go into making them serve the gameplay really well. You can zoom around slight turns with satisfying ease, while sharp corners require a bit more care. It is possible for the bike to slide out from under you if you try to turn too sharply at high speed, particularly if you stray off the tarmac and onto the grass, or the sand, or whatever the checkerboard of pixels might happen to represent. The hills are another real bonus to the madcap racing action, and actually there's something that are kind of uncommon in racing games of the time, which were often strictly flat affairs. The roads here though undulate wildly in a way that really adds to both the fun of the game and the sense of danger. Races can be a real roller coaster ride, and it's not unusual to catch some sick air, as I believe the cool kids are saying these days. Plus there's the ever-present threat of cars approaching unseen on the other side of a hill. Yes, you and your bike riding rivals are not the only occupants of these roads. The local traffic insists on going about their business, oblivious to the life and death struggles going on all around them. The cars can be pretty tough to avoid, and sometimes they even come in from the side at crossroads. They're the one design choice I'm not entirely sure I like. They add a bit more challenge and a constant sense of danger, as if the game needed more of that. But they also add a frustration factor, as they really can be tough to see coming, and plenty of times you'll find yourself running smack bang into the back of one just as you crest the hill. On the whole though, they add to the overall chaos, so they're a mostly welcome addition. The police can also be a frustration, but they too are a valuable part of the Road Rash ecosystem. They appear sporadically on bikes of their own, or helicopters in some occasions, and if you fall off your bike anywhere near one you'll be busted, which means your race is instantly over and you have to pay a sizable fine. But, and I say this as a 100% law-abiding citizen, there is a certain satisfaction that comes from punching a cop in the face as you race past them at 200 miles an hour. And this is probably a good junction to talk about the combat more fully. You have two basic attacks at your disposal, a punch and a kick, which you can deal out to riders on either side of you. The punch is, well, you probably know what a punch is. It knocks out a fair chunk of a rival rider's health bar, and when that bar reaches zero, they fall off their bike. A kick, on the other hand, doesn't do any damage, but instead shoves your opponent a good distance off to the side, potentially into the path of an oncoming car, or maybe even off the road altogether and into a clump of pixels that represents a tree. Both attacks are useful and very satisfying to pull off. But there's more. If you encounter an opponent who happens to be carrying a club, if you punch them just as they're about to whack you with it, you can steal it from them and then use it yourself. It does more damage, plus there's an incredibly satisfying noise when it makes contact with someone's helmet. Well, actually it's only a small innocuous sounding little clonk, but for some reason I just love it. I also love the sheer insanity of how far you can fly when you fall off your bike and somehow still get up and run. It's actually quite exhilarating to fly through the air. You almost seem to be going faster than you were when you were safely grounded, but it can't last. Eventually you have to land and then shuffle sadly back to where your supercharged lump of metal lies dormant on the ground. Sometimes you even have to run back far enough to see the mileometer tick down, and let me tell you, that's dispiriting, especially as you know that the race leaders are extending their lead. Like many racing games of the 16-bit era, the AI aren't really operating on the same level as you. You always start in last place, with the rest of the field strung out far ahead of you. So they're not really racing with you, they're more like obstacles for you to encounter at regular intervals. Obstacles that will kick and punch, but which are also in dire need of a kick or a punch themselves. In truth, you could possibly go through the game without a single violent outburst, but it is undeniably helpful to leave your opponents on their ass by the side of the road. Plus, you know, it's fun. But so long as you keep your finger on the accelerator and don't crash more than once or twice, you should be able to come in first place. Well, to begin with at least, there is a progression system of sorts. You win money based on your finishing position, and after each race you get a chance to go to the bike shop and upgrade your wheels, if you've got enough cash. And you will definitely have to do this if you want to keep on winning. There are 5 levels of races, and for each of these you need to finish in the top 3 on each of the 5 tracks before you can progress to the next level. Each level adds another few miles onto the length of the races, so they basically become marathons by the end. Of course, you've got a motorbike, which are not allowed in marathons, as I found out shortly after my record-breaking performance in the Olympics a while back. Anyway, that about covers the first game in the series. All things considered, it's a pretty simple game. You go fast, you bash the crap out of your rivals, you get money so you can go faster and bash even more crap out of your rivals. But it's executed well enough to be endlessly amusing, and the gameplay holds up well even today. So what does the sequel hold in store for us? Well, it's essentially more of the same, with a few tweaks to the formula. Probably the most obvious difference is the fact you can now race in locations from all around the United States, from the tropical paradise of Hawaii to the arid desert of Arizona to the whatever it is Tennessee has. Alcohol and country music, I guess. And speaking of music, the tracks in this game are themed to match the places you'll be racing through. Arizona has a distinctly western soundtrack, Tennessee has a tune with an upbeat swing, Hawaii's theme starts with an extended island drum solo. But all those elements have been melded with the hard rock that's essential to the Road Rash style. Personally, I think the music is a step up from the first game in the series, for the most part. There's more variety, and there are some really nice melodies and synth guitar solos in there. Everything in Road Rash 2 seems a little extra. Tracks have more hills and more curves, there's more variety in the sprites and there are just more of them. Your opponents seem a little more aggressive, there are more bikes to choose from. There's also a new weapon, the chain, to go along with the club, and it's even more brutal. Couple this with the fact that the weapons seem more common, and this game is even more chaotic than the first. The presentation has also been upped a little. Now, at the conclusion of each race, you get an amusing little skit depicting either your glorious victory or humiliating defeat, or your bike getting destroyed or you being busted, depending on how the race ends. They're a nice little touch that I found endlessly hilarious as a kid, even after I'd seen them 1,000 times. I was easily amused, I guess. Apart from that though, the sequel really doesn't add much to the formula other than refine it slightly and increase the polish. It's a better game, but not significantly so. How about Road Rash 3 then? Is there anything drastically new and exciting here? In a word, Farnacle. In a more appropriate word, no. As with the second game, the main difference here is the fact you can now travel much further afield. Now you can menace the law-abiding road users from countries all around the world, plus of course the non-law-abiding ones. The selection of countries really does span the globe, from Brazil to England to Japan to Kenya, and yes, Australia makes an appearance. Crikey! And in a nice little touch I really appreciate, the traffic here drives on the right side of the road, by which I mean the left side of the road. It really does make a difference too. You're always better riding in the correct lane if you can, so that you're not careening headfirst into oncoming traffic. Also, like the last game, the music matches the locations, with a version of Rule Britannia for the English stage, and that stereotypical Italian tune, can't remember what it's called, for Italy. You've probably heard it in a million ads for pizza or spaghetti sauce. Personally, I like the music in this game best out of the three. I think it uses the Mega Drive's surprisingly versatile sound chip very effectively. There are a few other changes. You can now upgrade your bike to increase its performance, meaning you don't have to save up for a whole new bike in order to become competitive once your rivals start putting up too much of a challenge. There are also new weapons, including oil cans you can drop on the road and which are almost totally useless, and nunchucks, which are a lot more useful and just plain cool. Furthermore, you can finally keep weapons between races, meaning you don't have to grab a new one every time, which makes them significantly more useful. Visually, there's an even greater variety of sprites, all of them well suited to the new exotic locations. Maybe it's just me, but they seem even more pixelated than ever, to the extent it's almost impossible to tell what some of them are supposed to be. It almost has a digitized feel, as if a lot of the sprites, including the riders, have been crudely recreated from real images. It somehow looks less polished than the previous game, but on the whole I think the variety and the very distinct environments make up for that. Whether you think this game looks better than the previous entries in the series is probably a matter of personal preference. If you're going to play one game from the series, Road Rash 3 is probably the one to try out, just because it has the most complete feature set. But you can't go too far wrong with any of them. It's the incredibly fun gameplay that makes these games great, and that's essentially the same in all three. Playing them again for this video, I really was struck by how solid the gameplay is, and how fun it remains even today. It may seem like an odd comparison, but in some ways it reminds me of Wipeout, the anti-gravity racing games that started on the PS1, and which are amongst my favourite games of all time. The slight heaviness to the handling and the sense of momentum, and the sometimes extreme jumps and elevation changes, have something of the same feel, albeit a lot less refined. Well, that's Road Rash for you, but this is not the end of the video. The series continued on for a while after the end of the 16-bit era, with entries on the PlayStation, Nintendo 64 and 3DO. I never played any of them, and by the new millennium the series had seemingly come to an end. But then, a few years ago, a spiritual successor called Road Redemption was released after a successful Kickstarter campaign. I was intrigued, so I snagged a copy when it was on sale a while back. How does it carry on the legacy of such a great series 2.5 decades later?
Shit, looks like you're riding into the Reaper's territory. These guys make Genghis Khan look like a vegan, so watch your back.
Well, sadly I can't say I'm a fan. And it really does pain me to say that because there's a lot of potential here. There's an intriguing main campaign that has a sort of roguelike system where you earn XP for permanent upgrades after each run. There's a lot of variety to the combat, and it feels as satisfying as ever to whack someone over the head with a crowbar. I'm not entirely sure about the inclusion of ranged weapons like guns, though. The handling of the bikes, though, it's just not like it was back in the day. It's quite a basic simulation of motorbike handling, by modern standards at least, and it's just not as fun as the twitchy, tough-to-control racing action of the older games. It really is a testament to how sophisticated the handling in the original games really was, that it still feels a lot more alive and satisfying than this modern reimagining. So I'm afraid that's about all I've got to say about Road Redemption. It may seem like I'm being unfair to the game, there's been a lot of effort put into it, but without that incredibly fun gameplay, the heart of the series is gone and I just have no interest in playing it. And on that somewhat dispiriting note, I guess that's it for today. Thanks for watching, if you have been, and if you haven't been, how the hell are you hearing me say this? Like, comment, subscribe, superscribe, inscribe, proscribe, prescribe, etc, etc. Until next time though, get off my lawn.